Biden in Jeddah 2 weeks ago. Rights groups have expressed outrage at the visit, saying the trip changes nothing to the fact that MBS is, quote, a killer. Well, for more, I'm joined by Fatima Abu al-Asrar. She's a non-resident scholar at the Middle East Institute. Fatima, thank you very much for joining us. My first question is, why this trip? Why this rehabilitation? What has changed?
Thank you so much for having me. Well, this trip comes at a very critical time as the war in Ukraine has really changed the political and economic equation. France, among other European countries, are trying to find other alternative sources of energy, and also they're trying to raise the oil production. And to this effect, we've seen a lot of changes in the region. We've seen President Biden's recent visit to Saudi Arabia, in which he had indirectly requested an increase in oil production in order to stabilize the energy resources and back off from basically getting oil resources from Russia. So it's in a moment of need, a greater need that the West seems to be realigning and reaching out to other Gulf countries in order to solidify their own interests at home, and that is the issue here.
I mean, this is clearly a victory for MBS. Is this a victory for impunity? What does this say about accountability on the world stage?
It's a very complicated question. There has been accountability to some extent. There has been pursuit, and I think pretty much France, the European countries, know exactly who they're dealing with. The problem is we see maybe double standards everywhere. If we want to care about human rights, we have to care about it everywhere. But there are certain exceptions that are being made. There are exceptions that are being made for China. There are exceptions being made for Russia. Even the United States is not fully immune. There are human rights abuses whether it's in Guantanamo Bay, whether it's in immigration issues that we're seeing, or even racial issues that we're seeing in the United States, for example. So human rights, it has to be dealt with, but also we have to find a way to influence positively in this important category. And part of this has to come from being able to talk to adversaries in some ways. But the Saudi Kingdom is not necessarily an adversary, as it has has historic relationship with Europe and with the United States, and positive relationship on that level. So from that perspective, international relations is just more complex than a set of conditionality and punishment, and it has to be seen from a different perspective.
I think it's fair to say that Mohammed bin Salman has been heavily ostracized by the international community to some extent for the past 4 years. He's now obviously desperate to bolster the country's regional power, especially when it comes to Iran. He wants to make his point of view very clear to the rest of the world.
That's true. And I think that at this point, it's important. MBS is trying to really build these relationships with the West, but at the same time, they're taking more or less reconciliatory tones towards Iran, trying to say that they are willing to work with whatever that they can have, because Iran is really having an influence in the region, in the Gulf, through its militias that cannot be undenied. And Saudis have really failed to deal with the threat of these militias from a military perspective. So I think that they are seeking a diplomatic solution alongside other Western countries, but from a realistic perspective, knowing that this threat is not really going away. But at the same time, they're trying to realign with other Western countries to say that Iran also should not be getting a carte blanche, and that you should apply also rigorous standards, whether from human rights or from other perspective, to get Iran to cooperate, because it hasn't really shown any cooperation so far.
Yeah, well, you speak of that message that will likely be, conveyed to the French president tonight here in Paris. France has been pushing for a nuclear deal. Do you think they're going to hear that message from Saudi Arabia?
I don't think the Saudis will favor a nuclear deal with Iran, given Iran's just hostile attitude, refusal to, deal with the Atomic Energy Commission. So there are several factors. Saudis are really concerned. They're not going to push for it, but if the Iran deal is to happen, if it's to take place, then the Saudis need to somewhat be Saudis and the Gulf countries need to be somewhat consulted and seen as a partner in this process, rather than an entity that this is imposed on. So the West has to somewhat change its views and realize that there's so much at stake with the stability of the Saudi kingdom, Israel, Yemen. So there are so many countries that are being affected. How can we really approach this relationship from a partnership perspective rather than, here's the deal, but, do you accept it or do you reject it?
All right, Fatima Abu Al-Asrar, from the Middle East Institute, joining us live from Washington. Thank you very much for your time. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.